Hello and welcome to another season of the Wavemakers Podcast, where we focus on the people at the intersection of maritime industry, decarbonization, and digital transformation. And my guest today is Katarina Uherova Hasbani. I couldn't do this without her because I do think she is the real representation of that intersection. Someone who has been working with leaders from governmental, corporate, startup sectors and shaped the strategies of many companies and many sectors in heavy asset industries, but also did all that she can to drive startup innovation forward and actually connect the two. Welcome, Katarina. I will usually start by asking, how do you describe yourself?
Thank you for having me. It's an honor. And it's really nice to see you in this role as well, right? It's been a while since we know each other. So I love the progress and the growth that I see. Me, I think increasingly I see myself as three things. I help organizations to navigate, advocate, and motivate. Those are the three things that I do, and you are right. I specialize in what I call asset-heavy industries, the material world, which is the other side of the coin of the digital world that we are so much exposed to today. But without the material world, we cannot exist. And shipping, of course, is an important part of it. So why navigate? I support many organizations to navigate this world of today, which we call it a VUCA world, volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous. And I do that at the intersection that brings together sustainability, decarbonization, digital, and regulatory and government perspective. I motivate because the organizations, in order to change, they need to work with their people. They need someone who educates them and brings them that incentive and inspiration to change. And I advocate for the necessary changes that we have to do, especially with the government and the regulatory regimes that must be part of the picture so that we achieve the objectives that we've set ourselves for.
And what you see in the world is what you carry in your heart, right?
Yes.
That is a sentence I found on your profile. And with that, I wanted to reflect on how did you arrive to drive change in heavy asset industry, but you started from studying political sciences, and you do it with so much passion. Where does that come from?
So I will share a very personal story, and then I'll tell you about my background. But and not many people know this because it goes down a few generations. But my grandfather, so the father of my grandmother, this was in the Habsburg Empire. We were in the same country, right? Serbia and Slovakia. He was imprisoned during the First World War, and he was taken to a prison in Russia. So few thousand kilometers from my home country and my grandmother. He survived the prison. He walked back. Before fighting, he had 2 kids, and he came back and he had another 2 kids. And he survived his wife, So exactly. So I think this is in my DNA, sort of this motivation, this aspiration, right, to go forward. And yes, I did study political sciences, but I am coming from a full generation of engineers on both sides of my family, right? And I always laugh at this. I wanted to be a rebel. I studied political sciences, and then I ended up working in the engineering world. So I think, in a way, your destiny will find you, whatever you try to do. And I actually spent a lot of my time in energy sector. It sort of came together at the time when I started working, and I had the opportunity to work on what was called a liberalization package for electricity and natural gas industry market in the European Union. I worked with a public affairs firm that advised companies on how to approach this situation, right? And energy brought together a lot of my interests, the economic interest, the technical interest, and also the social impact interest. And I just cannot leave, right? So together with the agenda that I drive today, sustainability and decarbonization, energy is an important part of it. Energy is the biggest part of our carbon emissions. When we think about sustainability, again, there are many ways how the energy sector is involved. Energy access is one of the SDGs, right? So I think it's such a big and important agenda. And we are sitting here in this studio with the lights, electricity on. We couldn't do anything without energy, right? And you talked about digitalization, of course, with the development of data centers today. Again, right? Energy is becoming to the forefront. And we will talk about shipping. Again, the intersection of shipping and energy is important. So I think just it gave me a nice place where to put all of my energy, right? And it's a very wide field that is only become more relevant today.
I do relate to that story quite a lot. And likewise, my grandpa, he was a military officer. And that gives this resilience when you think one day it's difficult and you just know I can't give up. I can't. It's in my DNA to push. And same, it's somehow we pick it up throughout life so that it's not foreign to us, I guess, to swap. Out of all these different roles, which one do you enjoy the most? Do you enjoy working with leaders and scoping strategies, or with startups?
Difficult question, right? I want to talk about impact, right? Because that's always, and today very, very, the word that everyone uses. I think there are two types of impacts that I want to have, and I enjoy being in roles that involve them. One, of course, I mean, early on in my career, I had the opportunity to have a lot of this big picture impact because I worked in the European Commission, where we covered more than 20 countries. I worked in the Cabinet of Energy Commissioner. I participated in some interesting portfolios, setting one of the first renewables, energy efficiency, carbon reduction targets. This was back in 2006. But as I was going through my career, the impact that I really enjoy having is when I see change in someone's life. So I think the roles, to answer your question, the roles that I enjoy the most are the roles really when I can work with people and bring out the best in them. Because I believe everyone has a talent, and as leaders, it is our role to uncover what the talent is and then bring it to light. And when I can do that, I think that's what really energizes me. And I think that's also my mission when it comes to decarbonization, right? Enable people to achieve this work that we have to do.
You are very action driven, and I knew that from the first time we met. You're very concrete. Okay, what do we need to do to make it happen and move? And how do you manage that with, again, pushing for changes that happen over such a long time? How do you balance this impatience, I guess, to see the effect with the change that it takes in the industries that we work in?
I'm sometimes wondering, who is born patient, right? Are there people who are born patient? Because it's something that I had to learn, right? Over the duration of my career. Early on, I was very impatient, right? I wanted to see the results immediately, but I've come to realize that one of the best achievements that I had were on topics, themes, initiatives that have taken a long time to build. Having that long view, and I think going through an experience where it happened, right? When you really work on something and it takes you 2, 3, 4, 5, 7 years to make it happen, I think that builds up that patience muscle that is needed. And we need it today with the goals that we are setting ourselves. But as you say, at the same time, in order to achieve the big goal, we have to action it today. So I try to ask myself every day, what is it that I have to do today? Not what I have to do tomorrow or in 2 weeks, but what is it that I have to do today to stay on the path? And of course, sometimes I have bad days, but overall, I try to stay on the path. So having that vision, I think, helps to stay patient.
Yes. When we look into something that would take 10 years, and so many things can happen in that 10 years, right? It is natural to also think oh my God, will this ever see the light of the day? And then you are right, focusing on, okay, this is beyond me and I can control what I can control. And that is starting with today. Talking about that long vision and going back to 2006, how do you see the changes being implemented? Do you think that the goals that we set for the future actually have a good trend to become a reality? How do you see the world shaping up towards 2030 or beyond?
I am very optimistic and very realistic. Yes. So that's a quite interesting combination, right? And I try to look at the past, but I also think if we think too much of the past, we cannot see the future that will become, right? Because the future can be radically different from the past. However, let's take the example of the targets that we've set in 2006 for European Union. Back then, those were targets for 2020. Those targets were overachieved. And it was a similar sort of situation as today. We were talking about, this is not possible, how will we do it? It will have an impact on the industry and so on. So, of course, that anxiety was there, but they were overachieved, right? So that's one thing is to understand that we overestimate what we can do in the short term, but we underestimate what we can do over a long term. So I put a lot of trust in that. And another very important element is what you do is innovation. We know what we know, but we don't know what we don't know. And there is that in the middle, we don't know what we know as well and so on. But innovation is the driver. And, we can see now exponential growth in so many areas. A lot of them are digital, but even shipping, when you think about the shipping, I think the first time, it was actually during the time that you were part of the Shell Accelerator in Singapore, right? Shipping industry at that time was different from the shipping industry today, Yes. Back then, it was one of the first programs where the shipping arm of Shell was exposed to startups, right? When it comes to digitalization, automation, this was very early on, right? Today, we see a lot of progress. We see a lot of progress, for example, on energy efficiency. I think there is a study that was done by one of the institutes in Singapore that says that since 2008, the absolute volume of shipped goods is increasing, but the efficiency, the efficiency gains are 30%, right? So there are so many things that are changing if we look back at how things were and how they are today. So the innovation part is there. And finally, I think I have some concern by what's happening on the international stage, right? But that's where I put a lot of hope in collaboration. And I think the area that we are in, decarbonization and sustainability in this very divided world, is one thing that we can agree on, right? I mean, even though there are some audiences who still think that, that might doubt the scientific facts, but still, we can all agree on the fact that we just have one planet. That our resources are finite for now until we, start exploring the space and so on. So I think bringing people around a collaborative topic will be very important in the next 10 to 15 years to come, right? Because otherwise, we won't be able to transition from where we are today, which is a very divided world, to a world where we will again prioritize prosperity, economic growth, well-being. And I believe we will get there, right? Because world develops in cycles, and as someone who studied political sciences, I spent some time in this study of cycles and stages of our development. And yes, we are now in the not so good part of the cycle, but I believe that this topic of sustainability and decarbonization and collaboration, innovation around it will help us to go ahead.
Mm-hmm. On that note, an interesting story. So Andre was participating at that time in Shell's Accelerator at the same time as me. And they were creating a material to pick up the oil spill from the ships. And then recently, when there was a spill in Singapore, startups and people in the WhatsApp group were talking about it, and he said, well, we were creating this material to collect the spill, and then they contacted him immediately, like, okay, WhatsApp me directly. And that is this example of how innovation also takes time, because for them too, it took a moment for that technology to become relevant, although at times we think maybe it's not as common, but when it happens, it needs really urgent solutions and effective solutions. And that's just a story that came to my mind as you were speaking.
You are right. You're right, because, I think to come up with innovations and new solutions, you have to have a vision for the future, right? So you cannot base yourself on what's happening right now. You have to start there, but you have to see these new situations that may come up. And talking about fuels and shipping, you know that right now I think the percentage of alternative fuels that we use outside of fossil fuels in shipping is roughly 1%. We need to get to 10% by 2030. And we really need all the possible innovations that can get us there. I get, typically, I think maybe you as well, I get asked, what will it be, the silver bullet? There will be no silver bullet. It will have to be like many different things coming together. Biofuels, hydrogen, hybrid solutions. We will need people who come up with these solutions, but also, and that's, I think, the gist of the work that I do, we need people who diligently implement certain decision points in their management style, in their decisions in the organizations. Together we talked about, for example, some of the announcements that were made by big corporate players. They are now stepping back from them because of different, maybe economic context is different, maybe people change. But I believe in the power of collective action, right? So if collectively as managers we decide that this, we want to prioritize decisions that are sustainable, that reflect the decarbonization agenda, that's what will drive us forward, right? And I also rely on, and that's why I like to work with leaders, because still, I think there are, I don't remember anymore the author of the study, but I remember the conclusion which said that the most important element for a company that is on sustainability or decarbonization journey is the vision of the CEO. So if the CEO is really persuaded that this agenda matters, that's when things advance and happen, right? So innovation, managers taking the right decision, CEO having the vision, right? It really requires an army to advance on this path.
Yes, and clear process, because without a clear process of how things are implemented and pushed through, then no matter how good technology is or startups or innovation is, they can't find their way or die in the process of going over the silos.
Yeah. I totally agree. And actually in my work, I learn a lot from HSE governance, which is very developed in the energy world, and I'm sure in shipping as well. And there is a governance, right? There needs to be an overall guiding document. There are procedures, practices that, for managers, but especially in the field, right? And what we are faced with now when it comes to sustainability and decarbonization is that we have to upgrade all these operating procedures, manuals to reflect these new criteria. And it's a work across the whole organization, right? It cannot be done only by the executives. It really has to impregnate, as you say, the procedures and operating manuals, documents in practice, education of those, on the ship, for example, in the ports, so they understand the impact of their day-to-day action and what they need to take. And it's going back to the theme of patience. It's a very long work and very patient work. Changing working culture and working habits is one of the most difficult things that we need to achieve as leaders. But with that longer term vision, I think we can get there. And also we shouldn't forget there are new generations coming. And you asked also about energy and then the shipping industry. These industries are, very old in a sense that they've been around, right? But they also are renewed regularly with the new professionals. And I think the young graduates, they are much more aware about these themes. and they will bring in this new culture. So it will happen also partly organically, right? So that's what I also put my trust in.
And when you work with the leadership and scope the strategy, and then on the other side experience what it means to push innovation bottom up through the work with startups, what is your superpower in doing the two? Maybe these are two different.
I think it is the ability to see what is best in people and then guide them to make it happen, right? So giving people the confidence that what they do matters, is possible, they can succeed in it, right? And sort of almost it's like paving the way for them in a sense, like rolling out the red carpet, right? That's how I think I see that work, because as an advisor, and many of my roles were consulting roles or advisory roles, I think it's really just about enabling the future to happen, right? And I like when I can co-shape it with my clients, with people that I work with, because we then co-own it together, and then we just we try to find what are the right resources. Do we have the right tools, right? Today, many of them are digital. Are we using the right partners in the ecosystem, which can be startups sometimes that they are corporates, right? Do we need to talk to the government, right? So it's really like, okay, what is the red carpet that will take us there? So I like to think that that's my superpower, and I try to use it as much as possible, right, to make things happen.
I find that role of consultants and advisors to be very interesting. To me, they are invisible champions because they work with different stakeholders, and they usually have more freedom to actually expand and identify the right resources and bring them together. And then somehow over time, the success stories portray the executive leadership of a corporate or whoever is in charge in the governmental sectors or the founders. And then these people who were actually the catalyst move on to another project, and somehow they get lost. But oftentimes, at least from what I've seen in the world, they're such a critical part of that change. And I really love that. And I admire it because it takes a lot to also leave that behind, wrap it, and then embark on a new journey.
Yeah, it's like, giving up your baby. But I love that's a wonderful description of the consulting advisory role. You're totally right. And I think that's the role, right? That's the role, because the worst role that a consultant or advisor can take is overshadow the executive, right? Because our role is really just to enable them. And in a way, I think if I leave a project, and this is the conundrum, because I always aspire to leave the project so that the client doesn't need me. Right? But at the same time, I mean, you have to find work for yourself elsewhere. But that's the objective of a consultant. Ideally, that should be the objective of a consultant, is that after you are done, the client can function by themselves.
That is the success
Yes,
story.
That's the success. That they fire you.
Oh.
in brackets, yeah.
And with that, would that be an analogy to how you would see yourself as a ship in the industry? Which ship are you?
So there is a ship an example of a ship, of a project that I like a lot, and I hope I can stand up for it. It's pioneering spirit of Edward Ħerema. It's the largest construction vessel currently available out there that is used for heavy lift, and specifically actually in many energy projects. But what is so nice about it, it's also one example of these visionary projects that started 20 years ago. Edward Ħerema invested in it itself. And today this ship is used by the old industry, oil and gas, by the new industry. When you think of the large offshore wind projects, hydrogen projects, it's, I think, oversubscribed. So and the beautiful name, Pioneering Spirit, right? So if there is one ship, I thought that would be the ship that I want to be.
I do admire these huge constructions and with many moving parts, right, that are there to set up the process, even when it comes to drilling. To me, it's just unbelievable how we have evolved to build these structures and that they're so sturdy. And then on the other side, how do you see the industry evolving? If you had a magic wand to create the future, how would you create it?
Well, I'll take an energy angle on it. Energy sector annually invests around $3 billion US. And today, the split is $1 billion US goes into fossil fuels, and a bit more than $1.7 billion US goes into what we call the clean energy. However, in order to put us on the path to net zero, we require an annual investment of $4.8 billion. And we needed to go to alternative energy, clean energy, right? So we basically need to scrap as much as possible what goes to fossil fuels and add additional $3 billion to make the energy transition to net zero happen, right? And every year as we go by, we have to repeat that, right? So if we don't do this shift, the gap is only growing. And just by 2030, let's say, 3 times 6, 18 billion US dollar gap that will be there if we don't do something, right? And the size of these numbers, and going back and thinking about also the fuels that we use in the shipping, going from 1% of clean fuels to 10%. I mean, it does not require what we often call transition. It requires very radical transformation, right? So if I had a magic tool, what I would really like to do is to expand this investment pool and push it in the direction that we need to go. And if there is someone who has the miracle impact, and I think we are not using it as much as we should, is really the government. I think we are coming to a point where, and I speak as a sustainability and decarbonization professional, we are coming to a point or an inflection point of how much private sector can do without government support. Because we have a lot of ambassadors, pioneers in the private sector that set the goals, they are investing. But it is a fact that we need a transition from where we are today to the future. I'll give you an example, which everyone knows. Solar industry, right? Solar PV industry would have taken 2 decades to scale, to reduce the cost per solar PV panel. But the government came in with feed-in tariffs that were allocated in the European market first. And on the back of it, the scaling, the volume started happening. First in Europe, then US, other regions across the world. And, the technology advancement happened on the back of the scale, the volume. And today, solar power generation is one of the with the lowest cost per unit in the power generation segment. So we need something similar for other areas of what we call the decarbonization agenda. Other sources of renewable power, energy efficiency, electric mobility. We need to look at alternative fuels, carbon capture and storage, right? Yes. And we cannot do this without the government intervention. And I find that there is an example, idea to explore, especially for the shipping industry. Today we have strategic reserves of different types of fuels. We need strategic reserves of the new types of fuels. If we really want to develop biofuels, if we really want to develop hydrogen, I think the government has to start looking at ways how they can support the pooling of these different resources. And again, the shipping industry is doing its share. There are initiatives where companies are coming together, they are tendering, purchasing of different type of new fuels from the market, but still it's insufficient. So in order to leapfrog, in order to do the radical transformation, we have to look at what the government can do differently. And I understand there are other priorities, defense being one of them, but this is as important for our survival and for us to have impact on the climate future of our planet and the industries that we work in.
Yes, we see that also from the previous examples, where somehow when the times are good, then the initiatives that embrace sustainability do find their spot in a portfolio. And then when the times are slightly worse, if there's not a must that pushes that agenda, that's usually one of the things to drop off. And we see that also with the concepts of circularity and ESG topics. And now with, for example, some of the initiatives, at least from the shipping sector, that EU is pushing through EU ETS, fuel EU regulation, we see that because of such high penalties, especially now with fuel EU, the companies can't easily pull away. And US is starting to follow with their own versions of different regulations. But you're right, that is actually what is needed to make sure that these agendas stay inside the companies. And I would also love to see countries individually also stepping out and accelerating that pace. But it is important to have the right leadership, and that drives us back to people. And what would be your advice to young people who are entering the sector? It can be energy, shipping. They're so closely related that it's difficult to actually separate them. How should they navigate these future waters?
There are so many questions to be answered at that age, but I think an important one is to think about the future for themselves, where they want to see themselves and what will get them there. And in order to do that, it's important to reflect on how they want to live their life. And by that, what I mean is what they want to work on day to day. I don't think young people, I definitely did not spend enough time thinking about that, right? I had some ideal picture in my mind, but I did not think through enough this, okay, what will this mean? How will I live my life if I do this, take this decision, take this industry role, right? So really, when someone thinks about where they want to go, think also about, what kind of work you will have to do day to day in order to get there, and what are the different stages of that work, right? Because that will evolve. So that's usually now my advice to the people that I coach or mentor. And of course, it's a never-ending task and work and evolution, even for me. I have 25 years ahead of me, so that's also the task for me to think about how I want to spend the rest of my working life.
You reflect only on advising women in the sector of either energy or shipping. That is one of the torches that we are trying to carry through. How do they take their spot, and what is needed to build a successful career?
Yes, if I had a magic tool, I would use it. I think we as women, we need to be aware that the times are changing. And what I find is very important to be aware of is that there are pockets of different situations in our working life. We might find ourselves, let's say, in a situations that are more how it used to be, maybe 5-10 years ago. And then in some other situations, we will find ourselves in how it will be in the future. And by the future, I mean really where the future is focused on equality, equality, diversity, and so on. So I recommend to be in tune with the situations that you as a woman, other women find themselves in and find their food and positioning in all these different situations. I think being an authentic leader, and male leader or female leader, means that we are able to adapt to the different situations, right? So that's a very important skill, especially for a woman, to have to be in tune with what's happening around us and then act accordingly to what is the best suited approach.
Yes. The first time I became aware of that as a difference is actually we had some workshop, and I was giving a workshop to, I think, 70 engineers or something like that. And there's a picture of me standing with 70 engineers in front of me. And someone afterwards asked me, how did it feel? And I thought to myself, like, what? And then I looked at like, oh, but I actually never had that impression because somehow I just decided that that's normal, and then I have my right to speak my mind and to drive things as I normally do. So at least maybe later, okay, when I reflect, I think, okay, maybe that's different, and maybe that's why I evolved to become loud and opinionated. But I just decided that I'm just gonna speak my mind and be equal to no matter who I speak to. And somehow I get comfortable also doing work in these industries. And I'm definitely happy to see things changing. And because I hear also different experiences, so I'm very excited to how we will shape it up for the future.
Yes, and this is also part of the collaboration that we need, right? I mean, at the end, we want to have best teams available. We want them to be diverse. We want men and women to work together, right? And we are now living times that really allow us to do that. So it's really exciting. And, I have a daughter. She will be 11 in January. Maybe she will listen to this podcast. She's starting to listen to this type of material. So, I hope that, and I can see, she's from a different generation that, she has no doubts about what she can do and no limits to what she can do. And I wish that for, a boy or a girl anywhere in the world. I think that would be the ideal scenario that we are working towards.
Mm-hmm. How does she think about the future? How does she look at the technology and that synergy of technology and the real world?
I mean, listen, I think for her generation, they don't know anything else, right? Mm-hmm. So all this sort of, it's melted together, right? And, the technical skills, the artistic skills, and the art is physical and digital, right? And the same, I think they live as much in the physical world as the digital world. And then, us as parents, we're trying to keep them sane. So, I think it's just, we are already creating a completely different world that they live in. So for us, as parents and leaders, I think it's just, we need to be in tune with what's happening with the younger generations, because I think the risk is that we become isolated. And that's like one of the worst things that can happen, because I also believe that as much as someone can learn from me, I can learn from a younger person, right? And especially when it comes to the new trends, new things, I think the younger, the professionals in the industry can teach us so much. So there is actually a name for this mentoring that happens, as much from top down than bottom up. And I find that that's a very good way how to revive some of the, let's say, industries where that are very hierarchical and maybe dominated by some older way of working, traditional way of working. So energy and shipping definitely are those examples. And I know that these new ways of developing young talent are being increasingly adopted there, and I find that encouraging.
With that, maybe we can wind down the episode. But before I close, usually these sessions are focused at me asking questions, but I'm also open to take any other questions for you if you have.
What is the opportunity that you are excited about, right? Because you work in a very specific space in the shipping industry, and you talk to professionals that come from the traditional new areas. What are you really excited about, and especially for the next period of the next, 24 months up to 5 years?
I do think that overall, it was always my passion to drive this world that is sustainable. But because that is somewhat far in the future, in this vision that I see it, then I find passion in the moment by dealing with people and actually challenging status quo and pushing them to think differently. And I found it to be in me, the things that I do with the most energy are those that come straight from the intuition with so much enthusiasm. And I somehow strive to bring that in others, even when they are working on technical projects and very heavy topics. It is usually that voice that is knocking behind and asking them to revisit an idea from a different place. And they usually don't listen to it because maybe it's not a typical way of doing things. But I feel that is that real voice that needs to come out, because that's a combination of their inner power and all the experience that came before that. And somehow I think because innovation is usually playing with that, what is now and what can it be, and unlocking that intersection, I find it interesting to unlock that door. And somehow because I'm in the industries now, in shipping before, in driving sustainability in different ways, like somehow that is channeled towards that bigger vision. I really enjoy about like being in communities and like holding each other and building this army that goes together and drives action. So for right now, I'm sticking to it.
Amazing. I totally agree with you. I think together, if each of us can make a small step, I think that's the biggest value add that we can have together, right? We don't have to wait for another technology advancement or hyperscaling. I also find a lot of opportunity in the small decisions that we can take on day-to-day basis. So amazing.
Yes, and sometimes it is also just about sharing, because we also lose so much time in reinventing the wheel because we don't talk about it. So that is my wish for the world, that actually even on corporate level, when there are some learnings internally, that we share more of that as opposed to holding on to them because of a fear or potential strategic advantage that may never happen because it would be pushed away. And maybe we can conclude it with that by embracing collaboration, communication, and action.
Amazing.
Thank you.
Thank you.
That's it.